major consideration is the rescuers. They have primary concern, okay, and then the casualty. And the reason for that is that if we injure or kill a rescuer, obviously the whole situation gets significantly worse. Many rescue agencies and organisations around the world tend to still hang on to an old, outdated idea of rescuer kind of bravado, where the rescuer dives in and risks their life and in order to save the casualty. Of course, with the effect being that, and we saw this in Hong Kong earlier this year, where a responder was killed on a search looking for two people who didn't have life-threatening injuries. Okay, the situation in Hong Kong in March of this year, which I'm sure many of you have heard about in the news media and what have you, the two individuals who were lost, neither of them were at risk of dying. They weren't even injured; they were just lost. So there was no real time constraint, and it wasn't an emergency. It was simply a search. And that fire responder fellow, he was 51. He was my age actually. Who was killed? There's no justification for that happening. Okay, there's none whatsoever. That should not have. I guess aside from being able to tie knots and rappel and raise a litter and all these mechanical skills, which are relatively easy to learn and to implement, there's a bigger issue, and that is the safety of the rescue team in the field, and obviously the safety of the casualty. We don't want to make them worse while we're out there. We need to maintain that at all times, and we're going to look at that in some detail over these next 3 days. Right? Just simply keeping responders safe. If a responder is killed on a search and rescue mission, that's a failure. It's not bravery, it's a failure of the mission if that happens. There's no other way of describing it. Okay? Different terminologies or terms we will use for the next 3 days. These are just ideas. They're not absolute. It's just a way of describing different roles and responsibilities. Okay, and many of them they're very American terms for different reasons. But these are the types of terms that we're going to use this week, and we're going to go through them and explain what they are. We need to have an incident commander or a team leader or a team captain, whatever you like, who ultimately is going to run the operation. Nothing is worse than a group of people trying to do something with no one coordinating it. This just becomes a disaster. So every time we do a scenario or an activity, not so much today, but over the next 2 days, we'll just nominate someone who will be the commander to run it. Okay, so not to say that the incident commander needs to have all the ideas necessarily, and frequently they won't. So the commander doesn't have to be the best rigger or the best knot tire or what have you. They just need to coordinate the activity. The ideas on how it's going to work will come from the whole team. Okay. Depending on how big and complicated the operation is, we may well have a second in charge or a 2IC who can coordinate a second part of the operation, especially if it's spread over a big area on the ground. So we may have an IC and a 2IC. Because we're building a mechanical system with ropes and pulleys and carabiners and devices, which moves a load, in this case a human or maybe 2 humans, in space, we need to have someone to do an overall check of that system before we start the operation. And that person will typically be the safety officer, okay? That's not the incident commander usually. It's someone different who has the overall say to state that the system is safe and that it's ready to operate. We will have a mainline or hauling line team. This is the individual or crew that builds the rope system that raises or lowers the rescue package. Okay, so they're building the machinery which is going to raise and lower the load. We typically then will have a secondary system, which is another rope run through a device which is a belay system. The belay is the backup safety, so that if the main system is compromised for whatever reason, we have a backup basically. We're going to have a discussion inevitably about what types of devices are appropriate as a rescue belay. Okay, we had a very animated discussion the other day, didn't we, about this? But there are only a few devices which are appropriate. All right, and we'll talk about that in some detail. Just to clarify this too, I'm not suggesting that we 100% of the time have to have a main line and belay line. You may, for whatever reason, opt to have a single rope system. Some agencies do that, and there is a case in point for that. You'd want to have a good reason for that, though, not to have a secondary system. Okay, particularly in the mountains when we're dealing with loose rock and edges and things that can compromise the main system. You want to have a pretty good reason not to have a belay. Okay, we'll talk about that. This role, and this is one of the most important in the team, is the edge attendant, or someone who literally stands on the edge. Okay. So what I'm saying is, if that's the drop down there, and this is our system, which is raising the load back here, the edge attendant is on a safety system, and they stand on the edge so they can look down, and they can communicate back like this. Okay, so they're the hub in the middle that makes it all work. We may or may not put a medic or an attendant on the stretcher, be it a scared or a basket type stretcher or what have you. Again, we'll discuss this in detail. Of course, if we put an attendant on the litter, it doubles the weight of the rescue load. And there are certain very effective ways of connecting a litter attendant in. We'll show you one extremely useful one using a device called an Aztec, which you guys have one. This is a new one. Give as many of you as possible a chance to actually do this role, being the litter attendant. For those in the group who've maybe done it many times, we won't necessarily make you go again. For those of you who've never done it, we'll obviously try and give you an opportunity over the next few days. These concepts here, so this idea of an offset is simply a rope system that enables us to move the rescue load sideways. Okay, so we can, rather than going straight up and down, we have the option to move laterally. There are a number of different offsets. We'll try and do at least one, probably. The predominant one that would be of use to everybody here straight away in this type of environment is a guiding line, and we'll almost certainly try and do this. Last slide here, just to give you a sense of, I guess, where vertical rescue has come from and some of the influences out there. What is this all about? What we've got here, that is a fellow in a litter, and that is the rescuer, just there. But to give you an idea of the scale of what we're looking at, from there to there is maybe, it's about 50 metres, okay? 50 metres. Yeah, 50 metres there. The actual cliff that they're on, the entire feature that they're on, okay, is 1,000 metres high. So this cliff, which is called El Capitan, it's in Yosemite Valley in California. It's twice the height of Taipei 101. Okay. This rescue of this fellow Neil Olson, okay, was carried out in 1972. Yeah. This is before industrial rope access, before errata even existed, before all of these things that we hear about now. This is like, way back in the early 1970s. Modern high-angle rescue comes ultimately from climbing. It doesn't come from rope access or any of these other things that people tend to think it does now. It comes out of climbing, because back then, these guys, and the rescuer here is a guy named Jim Bridwell. He was a climber. He wasn't a rope access technician or anything, because rope access didn't exist in the 1970s. There was no such thing. Okay. The techniques that we're going to look at today and over the next 3 days, they literally have their origins back like in the 1960s and 1970s. Things like Prussics, and pulleys and some of the devices we use are that old. They've been around a long time, and they're good because they're simple. We want light, simple techniques that are easy to use, that aren't complicated. And many of them go back a long time, basically. That system there, they were lowering these guys through a brake rack, which we still use now. Which we use the brake. For those of you that are really kind of interested in this stuff, not now, but in your own time, if you Google the story of this rescue here, it's an extraordinary story. There's a whole backstory behind what happened, and when they achieved this took 2 days. This whole rescue, Olsen. He had a broken femur, like he had a busted femur. Okay, they got him down. It took 2 days to accomplish it, and they saved the guy's life. You know, and it was the biggest high-angle rescue ever accomplished in the world, and it was like 1972, a long time ago. So I guess the fellow up the back who rightly asked the question about the 300-metre operation that they were in and how technically difficult that would be, it's a good question. I mean, it is achievable because Yosemite Search and Rescue, I mean, they rescue climbers off El Capitan every summer. And El Capitan is 3 times the height of that. It's like 1,000 metres, basically. So it is achievable with the right techniques in here. You know, so.